Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is that you are watching this. Happy New Year, welcome to January, and welcome back to this video where I'm talking about the best books that I read in 2022. So I read 69 books in 2022, which I'm really pleased with. I always set myself a little target of 52, just because that works out at about one a week. So anything above that, I'm always really, really pleased with. So I thought I would just do a quick video where I talk about my top 10 books of the year. And just a quick note on this, I am not including any Stephen King books because I read 7 novels and 3 short story collections by him, and I just feel like he featured quite heavily, and I would rather talk about him and some of my favourite King books in separate videos. For this one, I just want to talk about books by other authors that I absolutely loved. So number 10 is The Stepford Wives by Eyre. I really enjoyed this. I loved the general premise. I really liked the dynamics between the characters. There was just the right level of creepiness involved in this book. The only thing I will say is I just wish it had been a little bit longer and had a more rounded conclusion. It was just slightly too much of an open-ended book for me, but I really, really enjoyed it while I was reading it. So number 9 is a book that I actually finished in December, and that is The Terror by Dan Simmons. This is a big beast of a book. It's basically historical fantasy horror. Generally does not sound like my type of thing. I'm not massively into historical fiction, and I'm not into fantasy, but this took all the elements of a real life story, a real life scenario, and just added the right amount of a horror element to it. I can understand in a way why some people might not have enjoyed this book. It's very heavy on descriptive writing, describing every single little detail of the place, the setting, the people, the atmosphere, absolutely everything. But in a way, that's what makes it so good. I loved the feeling of being there in that situation, in that atmosphere, the cold, the isolation, and the fact that there was an added creature feature was just a bit of fun. But I think even if it hadn't had that, it would have still been an enjoyable read. Number 8 is the Amityville Horror, which I was quite surprised actually how much I enjoyed this, because as much as I love horror and I love true crime, I'm not generally somebody who likes to mix the two. For me, I prefer my true crime to be about the facts of the situation and what happened, rather than use that story as a basis for entertainment, which is essentially what this is. A real life family was murdered, and as somebody who is a skeptic when it comes to paranormal activities, that was essentially used to justify what happened and to be an excuse for why a certain person did what they did. And that makes me a little uncomfortable. However, I read this not believing that the events described in the book were actually real. Because, as I say, I think I'm just too much of a skeptic to believe that that sort of thing actually happens. So I read this as a complete work of fiction, which definitely made it more enjoyable. It definitely made it easier to read. And overall, I thought the spookiness, the creepiness, the horror factors were all there and at just the right level. So at number 7 was Ghost Road Blues by Jonathan Maybury, and I absolutely loved this. This was just absolute 100% fun. It's bloody, it's gory, it's violent, it's brutal, it's full of trigger warnings, but I just loved it. There are some things that were not quite so fun to read. There's a lot of racist language, and some things happen to some of the women, which are never enjoyable to read about. However, the characters were all absolutely brilliant. The story was great. It was fast-paced and completely took me along, and I was hooked. So number 6 was The Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris. And again, I absolutely loved this. This was the return of Hannibal Lecter. We were introduced to Clarice Starling, and both of them are absolutely fantastic characters. I love the dynamic between them. I love the detective investigation aspect to the story. But overall, I just loved the fact that it was as creepy as hell. And number 5 is Red Dragon by Thomas Harris. So this is the first book in the series, and this is where we are introduced to Hannibal Lecter. And this is probably one of the best first books in a series that I have read so far. The characters are all absolutely brilliantly written. The story is fantastic, and I loved every second of reading this one. So number 4 was The Hunted by Gabriel Bergmoser, and this is really a book that reads like a film. As you're reading it, you can just see it playing out in front of you. It jumps off the page. The characters were all absolutely brilliant, really memorable. It's so fast-paced. It's really more of a thriller. I loved the setting, the location, the fact that it was in Australia made it really different. It added so much to the story. But this is a brutal, violent book, so definitely be prepared for that. At number 3 was Kin by Keelan Patrick Burke, and I absolutely loved this. It, again, is brutal and violent and is all about cannibals, which is actually something I have not read a huge amount about. So if you do not have a strong stomach, then it might not be for you, but it was so well written. The characters were brilliant. The pacing was fantastic. I generally just absolutely loved this from the first page right through to the ending. And then at number 2 is a book that is completely different to everything else that I read in the year, and completely different to generally most books that I will pick up. And it was Frenchmans Creek by Daphne du Maurier. This is probably the closest I would get to saying that I had read and enjoyed a romance. The difference for me was that this was about pirates, and that's really all I can say about this. I really enjoyed it. It was great fun. Really liked the characters, and for the first time I didn't mind. The fact that it was a romance was the main plot of the story, but it was alongside the main female character wanting more, wanting something different from her life, wanting adventure, wanting somebody who wasn't her pathetic husband. And it was a really relatable story that no matter how happy you are with your life, there will always be something else that you want, something different, a change that you want to make. And I generally just absolutely loved it. And then my favourite book of the year, and I suppose I could say that I'm cheating with this because this was a reread and it has always been one of my favourite books ever since I first read it. So I kind of knew straight away that this was going to be quite high up and a tough contender for all other books of the year. But my absolute favourite book that I read in 2022 was Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I love this book, but I love it. And I think the reason why I love it is not only because the male character is the ultimate dark and brooding, grumpy bugger that you can't help but fall in love with, but the main character, Jane, is just brilliant. She is a fighter. She's determined. She's strong-willed, and no matter how much she is put down and bullied, she comes through and she just proves that being nice and being good and working hard does actually get you somewhere. And it's just a story that I love and I can't help it. And I love her as a character. And I absolutely love Rochester. He has flaws. Of course he does. I'm not going to give anything away, but you know, there's a secret which makes him a bit of an arsehole, but you kind of end up forgiving him. Maybe you shouldn't, maybe it's just me. But I absolutely love it. It's my favourite book of all time. And it was the best book that I read last year. So I cannot believe that we are already in January. Let me know what your favourite book of last year was. Pop it in the comments, let me know. What are you looking forward to reading this year? I will be back with some more videos because I have a challenge that I am setting myself. I have reading plans. I have already picked out some specific books that I want to read in the next year, and I will talk about them. So come back, check out another video. Don't forget to like this one, subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.